We're getting ready to install our Param 6000. Yesterday afternoon, evening, roughly 12 to 14 hours ago, we primed with our Purdue E02 100% solids epoxy primer. And what's really important, if you recall, is that we broadcast the sand to refusal. We talked a lot about that. So what that means is you throw as much sand as you can possibly get on there. And as you can see, we've got a very aggressive profile. So the reason for that is that helps the adhesion of the Param 6000, which is our polishable cement-based self-leveling overlay. Brian's sweeping the sand and pretty much getting rid of the sand. And I just, probably not necessary because we're building up 3/8 of an inch, but I just always like to get in the routine of just scraping. In case you had a large piece of grit or something, it just knocks it off back flush. And then from here, what we're going to do is we're going to run the vacuum. Let's go ahead and start the vacuum. And we want to get all of the residual sand nice and slow. I can hear the sand being sucked up into the vacuum. So it is important to get all of the residual off of there. All right, we'll turn that vacuum back off. So we'll focus in here on real tight. And when I use the term broadcast to refusal or 100% sand broadcast, I don't see any shiny spots. Where you get into a problem with adhesion is if you just do a medium broadcast and you have areas of epoxy that are exposed and it doesn't have the necessary amount of sand. So force yourself to throw on large amounts of sand. More is better. You can sweep off the remaining residual, scrape it, vacuum. Once we put our forms up, we're ready to install our Param 6000. We're about ready to mix up our Param 6000 self-leveling overlay cement. A couple of pointers that we want to bring to your attention. We talked about the importance of a 100% sand broadcast. Well, if you look over here in the back of this panel, there's a couple of areas like we talked about. You don't want to see this. This could really compromise the adhesion of the self-leveling overlay cement. So this is what we're talking about. Now, probably the reason that this occurred is the epoxy, when we rolled it down, we didn't put it thick enough, so there wasn't a thick enough build on the edge. So had we put it a little bit thicker, and probably on a large job, it's a good idea to use a notch squeegee, which we'll demonstrate in another video. But had we notched squeegee, it would have put it down at a certain mil thickness, broadcast the sand, we wouldn't have had this scenario. So if you're out on a job site and this does occur, what's the remedy for that? You could simply just spot roll or spot brush some more epoxy, broadcast some sand, let that cure, and then move on to the next step. So this is what you want to try to avoid, and I'm quite honestly glad that it occurred here to show you what to look for out on the job site. Okay, so what we've done is we've swept the whole area, and we've scraped it, we've vacuumed it, and before we mix, just a couple of really important factors. The self-leveling cement wants to seek its own level. So what you need to do is you need to build a form or a barrier to contain the material. On a scenario like this, we wouldn't want to just let it ooze over the edge. It wouldn't produce a flat level surface. So what we've done is we have some customized 3/8 inch thick foam rails. And on the bottom of the foam rails, we're using two-sided tape, which sticks down to the surface really nice. So Brian and I will show you over on this one. Basically, the two-sided tape just peels off. One side is adhering to the foam, while the other side has this tack to it, as you can see here. So now that we've done that, we're just going to go ahead and come right to this edge. And because we have all of the sand, we want to make sure that we burnish this down tight. Also, what we've done is Brian has already taken blue painter's tape and he's taped over the top of this foam. Now the real reason for that is we don't want foam chunking off like that and end up in our overlay cement. So the tape just kind of keeps everything confined down there. Now, as another option to these types of products like this, whether it's the Param 6000 or 5500, if you don't have access to these nice customized foam rails, you can use a form out of weather stripping. Now, one of the things that I don't like to do is just stick it right to the concrete that I'm working on and expect that to have enough adhesion. I've been out on job sites when we stick it down, and the pressure of the overlay cement sometimes will actually delaminate like this, and all of a sudden you're left with an edge that looks terrible because it's not sticking down properly, especially on cold concrete. So what's a good remedy for that? One thing you can do is take duct tape. You would pop a line, chalk a line down where you wanted your the barrier or your overlay to stop. Now, there's a lot more surface area here, burnishing this edge, for this weather stripping to stick to. So basically, once that's taped down, then you can come back and very carefully go right to the edge of that tape. And now you're not going to have any issues with that bowing out from the pressure of your overlay cement. Also, take it another step further. On a commercial job especially, perhaps you might not be able to pour the entire square footage in one day. So what you need to be concerned about is when we pour this overlay, we're using a variety of different tools. Oftentimes you'll have a flow of material that oozes up over and gets onto your adjoining area. So what I like to do is simply mask that area off, okay, right over the top. And then you peel that back off like this. And so any material that gets over here, it's on top of the plastic, and then you come back, and once it's set up, you peel it off, and you're left with a nice clean edge for the perimeter of your overlay. Another little tip that I like to use when using these types of products is what we call divider strips, or sometimes referred to as terrazzo strips. This happens to be a Schluter strip, but it's the same idea. And the logic is you can get it in a variety of different materials, whether it's zinc or copper or brass or bronze, and then this affixes down to your floor. How do you affix it to the floor? You can use liquid nails, you can use a resin, epoxy for example, or you could actually use a pneumatic air gun and shoot it in. Regardless of how you stick it to the floor, what you have to be concerned about is that the rail is in fact set level. So if you pan over here to my right, your left, you notice, this is an extreme example, but you'll notice that the one edge of the rail is sticking way up in the air. So if that was a scenario, you would have to actually take a builder's level or a laser level and make sure that you shim areas, and you want to make sure that your rail is set level despite what the concrete is doing. It appears that there's a big hump right here in the concrete and a low spot right there. So you would want to make certain that here you would have to shim it. Okay, now you've got this gigantic void where the overlay would just go under, so you'd want to silicone this side so you don't have a void where the overlay cement escapes into. As we mentioned earlier, these terrazzo strips or divider strips come in a wide variety of different shapes, sizes, widths, and heights. This one happens to be 3/8 by 1/8 of an inch, and it's a zinc strip. Okay, so this would attach down to the floor. This here is 3/8 by 1/2 inch. Brass, so you can see it comes in a variety of different shapes and sizes. Regardless of the dimensions of the strips that you're using, just a really quick couple of important factors. If you're polishing, so this is Param 6000, which is a polishable, grindable overlay cement, it's not as much of an issue to get your overlay cement extremely perfect and level. Most times what you do is you slightly overfill by a 1/16 of an inch, maybe an 1/8 of an inch, because the grinder is going to take all that back down, very similar to a terrazzo, cement-based, or a polyacrylate terrazzo. So, but if you're not going to grind and polish this material, in other words, if this is going to be your final surface without any grinding and polishing, it is ultra critical that this Param 6000 flushes out exactly level with the top of that strip. So what I like to do is, if you're not polishing it, there's no way you could get in and pour a whole floor monolithically. You would have to do sections. So what I'll do oftentimes is I'll come in once our divider strip is attached to the floor, and I would use this masking plastic, and I would carefully mask right to the top of the divider strip, and then I would fold this plastic out. When I pour my overlay cement, I know that some of it, I'll be able to smooth or trowel right up over the edge and actually bring a wave of material back over this, so I know that I'm in fact level. But here's the important pointer that a lot of people are not aware of. No more than about 10 to 15 minutes after you've smoothed it, what I'll like to do is I'll come through, and if it's high, I'll just take a trowel and I'll scrape it right onto the plastic if there's a high wave right here. And then what I'll do is I'll literally, 10 to 15 minutes later, I'll peel it back and I'll have one person just work this entire edge. And the leftover material, you can put it in a cup, and if it's a little bit low, you simply pour it along there, leveling it out. If it's a little bit high as you're going, you just keep scraping the residual off. So it's important that you do this step when you're not going to grind, hone, and polish. In other words, if that's just your finished surface. So those are some pretty interesting tips for our installation of Param 6000. Why don't we get busy mixing the material up?